I don't know how many of you know a band. There's a Christian band called Down Here. And they wrote a Christmas song that gets a lot of airtime at this time of the year. And here are the lyrics to it. It's called How Many Kings? And it says, how many kings stepped down from their thrones? How many lords have abandoned their homes? How many greats have become the least for me? How many gods have poured out their hearts to romance a world that's torn all apart? How many fathers gave up their sons for me? So they're asking an important question. How many kings have ever stepped down from their thrones? Just because they wanted to be with you. I mean, that's the question they're asking. So let me try and make it real world, because we actually have kings and queens today. Maybe you don't think about this other than British royalty, but obviously there's a queen in England, and this is the royal family in England. But did you know that there are also many other kings and queens around the globe? This is the king and queen of the Netherlands and their family. So there's royalty in the Netherlands. This is the royal family in Belgium. And then this is the king and queen of Spain. Is it conceivable to you that the king and queen of Spain, so wanting to get to know you, would step down from their throne, give up all the privileges of royalty and wealth to move into Ridgeway because they just wanted to get to know you a little better? Is that conceivable? I mean, it's really hard to imagine, right? That they would give up all that they have to live with us here in rural Wisconsin because they just really like us. I mean, it's really hard to think about that. But the reality is, what we're celebrating at Christmas season is much bigger than that. Because what the Bible teaches is that Jesus wasn't just the king, he is the creator of the entire universe. The creator of all things. And this is some of my favorite verses are from the book of Colossians that talk about who Jesus is. It says this: Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. In other words, you want to know what the Father's like? You want to know what God the Father's like? You look at Jesus, because God the Son reveals what God the Father's like. So you may have questions about God, the God of the Old Testament. I don't understand why he could be this way. Okay, great. Some of that stuff is really complex, but if you want to know what God is like, you look at Jesus, because Jesus reveals what God the Father's like. He, Jesus, existed before anything was created, and he is supreme over all creation. For through him, God created, look at that, everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. So everything you have ever seen, God, Jesus, God the Son, created. He made the things we can see and the things we can't see. Everything was created through him and for him. He existed before anything else, and he, Jesus, holds all creation together. That's who Mary was holding in her arms that night 2,000 years ago. She was holding the creator of the universe who stepped down from his throne in perfect heaven to be born here, to be born into this world. There are so many aspects of the Christmas story that are amazing. But I was reminded of one that was really, I had not thought about when I was reading a devotional a little while ago, and the author of the devotional asked this question: why wasn't Jesus born in a palace? He could have been. There were palaces back then, right? Why wasn't he born in a palace? He was the creator of the universe. Did he deserve to be born in a palace? If you're leaving heaven, the least you can do is go into a palace. But the reality, of course, is the greatest palace on earth would be like the least outhouse in heaven, right? And they don't have outhouses in heaven, but it would be the worst thing in heaven. I mean, the greatest, most beautiful, amazing thing we could ever show you in a place that exists on planet Earth is nothing compared to heaven. This would be the slums in heaven if there were slums in heaven. And so, I mean, there is that. It wouldn't feel like a palace to him, but to go beyond this, to be born, in a stable, right? In a barn. The reality was, historians tell us that it probably wasn't like we picture like a barn, or it was probably a cave on the outskirts of Bethlehem. It was probably just a cave. And that's where he, the creator of the universe, was born into a cave, in a dark cave, surrounded by farm animals, laid in a manger, a feeding trough, wrapped in strips of cloth, born to a poor young couple that had no resources, in a completely irrelevant city on the planet at that time, Bethlehem. Small little town, small little rural town. It would be like if Jesus decided to come into the world again today in the same way, like he chose to be born to a young 18-year-old couple living in a trailer outside of Rui. I mean, what would you think if we started saying, the creator of the universe is here in this trailer in Rui? Come on, let's go see. Yeah, right? I mean, it's inconceivable. It's inconceivable to us. But here's the thing. Every element of the Christmas story, every part of it, from where he was born and how he was born and the conditions he lived in, every single part of it was intentional by God. It wasn't like the God the Father was sitting in heaven and was like, oh no, she went into labor. I didn't know she was going to go into labor and have to give birth in a stable in Bethlehem. Oh no. Every part of it was intentional. And if you understand what was happening in the story, then you understand that there are things that God intended to communicate to us. And so that's what I want to talk about, and that's why we're doing this message today. I want to talk to you about how to imitate some of the values that Jesus showed us with his birth. These are things that I have never talked about, and I'll show you why later. We're coming back to that opening question of why wasn't he born in a palace? So I want to ask you to open up your program, take out the notes you'll find inside, grab a pen. There'll be some really interesting things to talk about from the birth of Jesus, things that I hope will be new for most of you that you've never considered before, right from the story. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, glad you tuned in. In your comment section right below the video you're watching is a link to these notes. If you want to open them up and follow along, you can. So let's talk about two different values that Jesus modeled at Christmas that are so relevant for us today. The first thing that the whole Christmas story is telling us is you and I need to learn to imitate the humility of Jesus. That's the first thing that the Christmas story is telling us. We need to learn how to imitate the humility of Jesus. If I asked you to define humility, many of you would really struggle with that. What does it mean to be humble? So let me give you two definitions that I've learned over the years of teaching on this important subject. First definition is this. Humility is, and these are on your notes, you have an accurate view of yourself. It includes both your strengths and your weaknesses and limitations. So if I asked you to turn your notes over, and I don't want you to, but if I asked you to do this, and write on the back a list of all of your weaknesses, things you're just not good at, could you do that? Some of you couldn't list more than a couple, and whoa, that's such a problem. If you can't honestly list what you're not good at, then there's a problem. Because humility is an honest evaluation of our weaknesses and limitations. These are not my strengths, but the other side of it is too, some of you would struggle on the other side. If I said I want you to list your strengths, some of you would struggle right there. You couldn't list more than one. Some of you couldn't even put one down, which isn't accurate either. You think God made you and forgot to put strengths inside of you? Oh no, he did not. They're in there. And that's not humility to say, I have no strengths. That's false humility. That's not healthy either. Humility is, here's what I'm good at, and here's what I'm not good at. Can you say that? That's what humility is. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at. And then the other aspect of it, it's not just knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are. It's how you use it. And this next definition is from one of my favorite authors. His name is John Dixon. He wrote a book on humility, one of my favorite books. He said, humility is the noble choice to forgo your status, deploy your resources, or use your influence for the good of others before yourself in this world. So when people my age and older think about humble people who have walked this planet, no doubt about it, on almost everyone's list will be this woman. At some point, Mother Teresa's name will come up. And she is viewed as this tremendously humble woman. And not just because she's aware of her strengths and weaknesses. Oh no, it's what she did with what she had, right? She moved into these slums in Calcutta. She began to serve the dying as they died, to give them care and dignity in their final days on earth. She modeled humility. It wasn't about her, was it? It was about using what she had to serve the needs of the people around her. And that's what marked her as a humble person. It's not just that you know your strengths and weaknesses, it's what you do with what you have. Now, let me really take the challenge level up to where it needs to be. Okay? About a month ago, I was just reading in my Bible, and I came across a verse that stunned me. And whenever you're reading in the Bible and something really kind of strikes you hard, you got to stop and think about it because God's trying to talk to you. And I haven't shared this verse until today. Look at what it says. Here's where the bar is. Always be humble and gentle. That's not what it sounded like when I read it all those weeks ago. It sounded more like this. It's like, always? Always. Okay, time for some self-evaluation. Raise your hand if you are always humble and gentle. Please don't raise your hand because we're going to wonder about you, okay? So, right, how many of you are always, okay, for those of you married, I am always gentle with my spouse, right? I am always gentle. Those your parents, I am always gentle with my kids. I am always, right? Those you working in an office place, you're working with other people. I am always gentle with my coworkers and my customers and the people I work with. Isn't this crazy? Look at the level of what he asks from us. Always be humble and gentle. And by the way, humility and gentleness are twins. They are connected. If you are not gentle, something's wrong with your humility. One of the quotes I read about a month ago too, it said, "There is nothing you have ever said in anger that wouldn't have been said better with gentleness or kindness." Ever. Isn't that a convicting thing to say? And it's right. Gentleness and humility are associated. They go hand in hand. And God has set the bar that high and says, here's what I want for your life. I want you to always be humble. I want you to always be gentle. And every single human being listening to me today goes, oh boy, I got some work to do here, right? We all say it. Now, some of you are already internally going, I don't get this. I mean, who cares, right? Humility? You think humility is going to allow me to advance in my career? You think it's going to allow me to be the best athlete? You think it's going to be the best at anything? Of course not. Humility is going to make me a doormat, and people really react negatively to this. So let me talk for a moment about why it is important that you reject what the world so often values, this area of pride. Because if you think about what pride does, you all know this. Here's what the impact of pride. Pride stops you from listening, right? Proud people don't listen. Pride stops you from caring about others. It's all about you. It keeps you from learning and improving because you don't need to. If you're proud and arrogant, who's got anything really to teach you? Ever met a 19 or 20-year-old man? Right? Almost every one of us in the room, or it's not just limited to men, obviously, right? We knew so much more than our parents. We were so smart and they were so dumb when we were 19 or 20. Right? So we don't need to learn anything from them. How dare they try and teach us something? Don't they know who I am? My goodness, right? Arrogance makes you need to be better, so then you trivialize the contribution of others. Ever worked with someone who took credit for what you did? Or you did something amazing and they didn't even say thank you? Because they couldn't, because after all, that would make it not about them for 1 second. And arrogance protects image at the expense of reality. Can't be honest. Ever work with somebody who would never own their mistakes? And then proud people think they're always right. Do you know anyone in your life who always thinks they're always right? It's tough, right? Now, it's so easy, and here's the problem. It is super easy for all of us to sit here today and think of other people who have this issue. Okay, so then you know where I'm going with this, right? Which of those qualities can people say about you? Is there evidence of pride in your heart, in your life? Oh, it's so easy for me to point the finger at all the people around me that have this problem. Boy, they got a problem with this. I wish they were here today. Oh, I wish my spouse was here today. Oh, I wish my boss was here today, right? Some of you are even thinking that. And God is saying, is pride an issue in your life? Are you always humble and gentle? Oh, you're going to say that? Then maybe the focus should just be here. Maybe we should just be thinking about ourselves. And the reason that's so important is because the Bible is so clear about what will happen if you let pride in your life. Pride will eventually result in your destruction. It will destroy the life that God has for you. And a haughty spirit, which is an arrogant spirit, will come before you fall. I literally, I've seen people fall because of their pride and arrogance and all these qualities that go right along with it. I know this guy who told me once when he was in elementary school, he looked around one day and realized that he was the smartest person in the entire room, smarter, he thought, than even his own teachers. Now, it takes a little bit of arrogance in elementary school to think you are the smartest person in the room, right? Unfortunately for this person that I know, no one ever challenged him, ever. And he has spent his life thinking he is smarter than any other human in the world. Do you know what that makes when you try and relate to someone like that? This person has missed out on everything that God has for them. Because that arrogance blocks relationships, keeps them from learning and becoming what they are capable of becoming. It is so destructive. And it's easy to see it in others, but is it possible that it might be inside of you? Because it's destroying you if it is. So spin it around. I'm saying that humility is really, really important, so why would we think about becoming humble? What's interesting, scientists are starting to study the impacts of humility on our brains and our relationships. I saw this article in prepping this message, and this person said, the scientist was saying, higher levels of humility have been associated with a higher sense of life purpose, better health, increased workplace harmony, and longer-lasting marriages and greater generosity. And then he goes on to say, it was a fascinating thing, they did this study in which they said, if you're single, you need to understand this. If you're single, you need to understand that people find you to be a more attractive human being if you are humble rather than arrogant. And they talked about the study that they'd done. It's like, yeah, you want to look better? You can try makeup. But you should try to clothe yourself with humility, because that'll do more for making you attractive, because people aren't attracted to arrogance in general. The majority of people are attracted to humility when they see it. It's an attractive quality inside of you. You want to get the guy, you want to get the girl, then, who talks about this? Humility, but we know this from research. It's so interesting. And at the end of it, the author said this: when you don't always need to be right, relationships are smoother and can be more intimate. Isn't that true? We all know that. Nobody looks at that and says, no. You know that when there's humility in a marriage relationship, you got a shot. Because you can solve your problems and talk things through, and you can have humility, because they're going to be gentle, and there's going to be gentleness in the relationship. So interesting. This man's name is G.J. Hart. At one time, he was the CEO of Texas Roadhouse, and he was asked one day in an interview, he said, how do you know which emerging leaders you should pour your life into? It's a huge topic in the business world. How do you know who you should be developing for your company? Because you're always going to have turnover. So how do you get the next person ready to step into the key leadership role? How do you identify those emerging leaders? This is so common in the business world. I wish I had time to show you this. But he said, I can usually tell if they have the humility to make it. There is so much being written in the business world about, and again, I don't know if he's a Christian. I know the other one that I quote all the time, Jim Collins, is not a follower of Jesus. And over and over and over repeatedly, they talk about the same thing. If you want to be successful in business, you need to be humble. It just doesn't fit our perception, but it's what business leaders are understanding. Oh, I wish I had time to show you more about that. That author I mentioned earlier, John Dixon, said the most influential and inspiring people are often marked by humility. And it's obvious, because here's what humility does inside of us. It allows us to commit to our own personal growth and development, right? If I'm humble, that means I know I don't know everything. So that means I'm really teachable. You should teach me more, because I don't know enough about myself. And I don't know enough about relationships, and I don't know about how to do my job perfectly. I can learn more from you. Humility engages others collaboratively, because I need other people. I know that. Humility builds others up. My goal is not to tear them down, it's to build them up. It allows you to connect deeply in real relationships that develop that intimacy, and then humble people serve those around them. So this is the better life. Jesus Christ, on the night he was born in the most humble. Is there anything more humble he could have chosen? Can you think of anything more he could have done to demonstrate humility that night? It was the most humble location, the most humble place, the most humble circumstances, right? And it was all intentional, saying, hey, listen, you want to be my follower? You want the best life? Follow me. Follow me to humility, because it'll make your life so much better. Oh, man. Not easier, but better. So what does it mean to really pursue humility? How do we do this? How do we imitate his humility? First, you have to make the choice to pursue humility. That's what it means first. You have to make the choice to become humble. Thankfully, it is a choice you can make. You have to make the choice to pursue humility. That was the choice he made the night he was born. He left heaven to choose the most humble circumstances imaginable. Jesus is our example, right? I follow Jesus. If you follow Jesus, he's your example. He chose humility, and we have to choose it too. And the Bible is very clear about this. It says, so you need to choose to humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at the right time he will lift you up in honor. By the way, if you have your pen and you got your notes, would you underline two words in that verse? Underline the word humble and the word honor. Because in the Bible, they are connected repeatedly. If you choose humility, then you will get God's involvement in your life, and he will honor you. If you choose pride and arrogance, the other path, then he will bring you down. Not because he hates you, but because that is so destructive to you and everyone around you. Like a loving father, he will begin to discipline you to take something awful out of your life. Because he doesn't want you to hurt yourself. No loving parent does. So you choose. Humility is associated with honor. Do you make this choice? Now, those of you know me know it's kind of funny whenever I talk about the subject of pride, because I was super proud at the age of 17, 18 when I went off on my own. Man, I was proud of my spiritual life. I was proud of my knowledge. I mean, mom couldn't teach me anything. I was so arrogant. And then I became a pastor. Disaster. I did not have the character to be a pastor at the age that I was a pastor. I was 20. I was not ready for that. I was so unteachable and so arrogant until the night that I became aware that it was even an issue in my life. I still remember I was driving into church, or driving into lead a life group. I was a pastor of a church in Madison at the time, and I had the Christian radio station on. There was this teacher who was teaching about pride, and he said something, and the moment he said it, I was so convicted. Because as I listened to what he was saying that day on the radio, I knew he was talking to me. God had written that one guy's sermon, put it on the radio at that moment just for me. Because all of a sudden I knew that this was my problem. For the first time in my life, at the age of 20 or 21, I became aware I was an arrogant man. I didn't know it till then. But I knew it then. I had no idea what to do. I knew what the Bible said. Hey, you know what's going to happen if you choose arrogance? You will fall. I didn't want that. So the only thing I knew how to do, and I started that night, was begin to pray and say, God, would you please humble me? I literally heard a pastor say, never pray that prayer. It's like, what are you asking God to do? I'm like, why would you say that? He's already said, if you don't humble yourself, then he'll do it for you. You can trust his loving ways. So why wouldn't you ask him for it? I don't even understand that. I've been praying that prayer for 27 years now. Humble me. Our God loves you enough to do it the right way without crushing you. You can let him humble you, and it'll bring you into a better life. You get to make the choice, though. You get to choose. The second part of humility, if we're going to imitate his humility, is we got to learn to think about ourselves correctly, because we often don't. I didn't, not at the age of 19, not at the age of 20. And my thought was, aren't they lucky to have me? That's not a good thought for a pastor. It's really not a good thought. Oh, there was so much arrogance in my head. And it's not like the Bible is unclear about this, but look at verses like this. Don't think you're better than you really are. He could have just put my name in there. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith that God has given us. And again, humility isn't thinking that you're awful and terrible at everything. That's not humility, it's false humility. Humility is, here are my strengths and here are my weaknesses. It's both, and you're honest about both. That's humility. That's genuine humility. Now, in case you haven't caught this already, I don't struggle on the side of knowing what my strengths are. I struggle on the other side of downplaying my weaknesses or not really being self-aware about areas where I'm not that strong. And it creates arrogance inside of me. And so part of what I've done for ever since that night is, many of you know that I have a notebook where I write down the things I pray about. And I have a section in there, and it's titled Pride. And in that pride section, I have key things I've learned that God has taught me over the years, because I repeat them because I don't want to relearn the lessons. If God teaches you something and you forget it, he's got to teach you again. I don't like that. I want to learn it once. So these are some of the key truths I've learned and that I say in my time when I'm praying to God. I say to God, I have, and I know this, God, I have what I have because of you and no other reason. I know that. If God would have allowed me to be born in Calcutta, I would be dead. I'm past the life expectancy of the average person there. I would never have what I had. If it had allowed me to be born into so many other places in this globe, I would not have what I have. I have what I have not because of me and how smart I am and how hard I work. If I wouldn't have been born where I was born, God, I'd have nothing. God let me have what I have. He's used what I've, developed. But if he wouldn't have given it to me in the first place, I couldn't have developed it. Does everyone have the ability to speak publicly? Is that everybody has that universal gift? Of course not. He gave me that. I just developed what he gave me. We all have gifts, and so I remind myself, God, and these are my thoughts to keep myself humble. I think about myself correctly. Try to. My job is to notice and bring out the best in others. When you're arrogant and proud and pride takes over in your life, you're thinking about yourself, right? And so I remind myself regularly, God, today when I go to work and I go to Land's End, I'm going to be looking for opportunities how to bring out the best in others and highlight what they're good at, not make it about me. Because that's what humility does. You use what you have for the benefit of others. And I put that thought in my mind. And then I remind myself that I am at every moment completely dependent on God. Because here's the truth, isn't this true? I am alive for as long as God wants me alive, right? And the moment my Father in heaven decides my time is done, is there anything I can do about that? There is nothing I can do about that. My life is completely in his hands. Every breath I draw is because he allows me to draw it. I am completely dependent on God every moment of every day. So every day I put these kind of thoughts in myself so I think correctly about my life and what I have. Are you thinking correctly about yourself? And then the third thing to really imitate his humility is you got to put yourself in humbling situations. That's hard. But this is what you have to do. And Jesus is so clear about it in his teaching, and I put a different verse on it, but I want to talk about it. I put a verse on here, but I want to talk about a different verse. And it's the story behind this. So some of you know that on the night Jesus was betrayed, right before Judas went off to betray him, the night before he was executed, he met with his disciples one final time in what we call the Last Supper. And in that time, in that home, in Jewish tradition, they would recline around the table. So they'd be around the table and they'd be leaning on these cushions or pillows and their feet would be out like this. So you were always really close to somebody's feet. Some of you are like, that is the most disgusting way to eat, right? Because you're like, I don't like feet, don't want to see feet. Well, imagine feet in those days. Feet in those days, you're open-toed sandals, and so your feet are filthy from the dirty roads and all the animal stuff that's on those roads. And so when you came into somebody's home, part of what they would do is they'd have their lowliest servant in the house. Did you know if you were a Jew and a servant living in Israel, you could not be forced to do this task? It was considered too disgusting for you to have to do. Only the lowliest of servants in the household were forced to wash someone's feet. And Jesus, as they're reclining at the table right before he's about to give his life, he gets up, he puts a towel around his waist, he gets down on his knees, and he starts washing the feet of his disciples. This was so scandalous. It would be like the Queen of England hearing that your toilet is backed up. And she comes with a plunger to plunge your toilet, right? Is that conceivable? That ever going to happen? I mean, it's ridiculous. Peter is so offended by this, he tries to stop Jesus and says, listen, if you don't let me do this, you can't have any part in what I'm doing next. And then when it's over, he washes their feet. They're stunned. I can't imagine the silence in the room as everyone's like, what is happening? And then he teaches them. He says, after washing their feet, he put on his robe again, sat down and asked, do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, which means ruler, And you're right, because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I've given you an example to follow. Do as I've done to you. Now that you know these things, God will bless you just for knowing about them. Nope. God's blessing will be on you if you start doing them. So he says, you need to think about how to put yourself in humble situations. And of course, we're talking about serving people. Now, we often talk about church-wide serving. I'm not talking about that right now. I'm talking about you serving in the homes where you live, in the places where you work. That's what I'm talking about. So let me give you an example. It's very common in many homes. Many of you can be together with relatives over the next 24 hours, or my family's getting together the following weekend. So some of you have that situation. Maybe it'll be weeks from now. What was very common in the homes, in the parties I went to many, many times, is that the women would prepare the meal, and then after the meal was over, the women would clean the entire meal back up, and the guys would just sit there. Okay? If you're a guy, don't do that. Don't do that. Are you grateful for the food they just made for you? Then when the meal is over, before they can lift a finger, you get up, you go clean the kitchen, you put everything away, you wash all the dishes, you do it all, and you say thank you that they made that for you. You serve them. Now, you better have a defib machine around, because for many of those women, they're going to fall to the ground. They're going to be like, what? Who has possessed this person? Because they can't conceive of it. And some of you men are like, well, that's just below me. Oh, we got to talk. Do you follow him at all? You're a servant. There's nothing below you. There's nothing below you. How can you serve with the people you're going to be spending Christmas with? How can you serve them? Now, maybe that's not the thing you choose to do, but there are going to be ways that you can serve. There are going to be ways that you can serve this holiday season. For some of you, one of the things I tried to do over the last month from Thanksgiving on is in the place where I work, at Land's End, my department, a lot of people I work with, and I wanted to make the last month really special for a lot of these people. And so for the last month, I've been writing handwritten cards, except for a few emails when it was like too much to write, to my coworkers. And what I've been focusing on is, I've worked there for over 2 years now. I'm like, here's what I like about you and what I appreciate about working with you. And like I said, some of them were so long I couldn't write it in a card. I had to type it up because I work with some wonderful people. But you know what it's like, you know what it's like in every place where you work. People don't often know how they're being perceived. And they wonder if anyone thinks they're doing a good job at all. And then with almost all of them, I put a little gift card in with almost all of them. It wasn't a lot of money. Most of them just cost me a few dollars. And so then I've been handing these out over the last month. And this last week, as everyone was finishing up their work for this last week before the holiday break, I had my list of all the people I was writing to. And I wrote all my cards out, and I put the gifts in there, and then there was this really cool moment right at the end when the last cards I gave was this person I work with, and I just think this young woman is just fantastic. She's got a great personality, makes me laugh all the time. It's like, don't you appreciate that in an office where it's high stress, high demands, like someone who's happy and makes you laugh? That's a wonderful quality in a world. And I bet she doesn't know how much so many people appreciate this person. This person literally has people who stop by her desk all day long because they just want to talk to her and be with her. Isn't that cool? And I sit right next to her. I said, I see. It's like I see this little parade because people want to be around. So I just wrote this card out, told her how much I appreciated those things and how much look how admired you are, how many people just come because they just want to say hi to you and talk to you. Isn't that cool? I put a little card in there, and she opened it right up. And then as I was getting ready to leave for the weekend, I saw her stand up and stand, because, I guess get my coat on, get my bag, packing up my laptop, I'm about to go. And she stood in the aisle, and when I tried to leave, she hugged me. There's not a lot of hugging that goes on in my department at Land's End, just so you know. Matter of fact, pretty sure that's my first one. And I thought, oh, she probably needed that. She needed someone to say, you know what, I notice. And your presence here really matters. And here's some of the wonderful things about you that I really appreciate. Who doesn't need that? Who doesn't need that? Who can you give that to this holiday season? It's not too late. Some of you won't be back at work again until after Christmas. Most of you won't be. It's not too late. Go back into your work environments and think, what humbling thing can I do? How can I serve the people I work with? Make it your goal to be the best servant wherever you work, just like Jesus. Now, we could stop there and certainly have enough to work on, right? Always be humble and gentle. Always. But there's another aspect of the Christmas story, and this blew me away when I read it, and that rarely happens now. Just so surprising to me and so impactful to me that it's why I'm doing this message. The second thing I want to talk to you about today, and just real brief, is this. We need to learn how to imitate Jesus' high value that he put on all people. This is so significant. I hope I can do it justice. In every community, we live in different places. We all live in different towns. We live in different towns all over Southwest Wisconsin. So in every community that you're in, there are always people at the bottom rung of the ladder, right? Society's bottom rung. In every community, Dodgeville, Rui, Ridge, it doesn't matter where you live, Madison, there are people at the top and people at the bottom. And sometimes there are characteristics of those people at the bottom. They live in places that for many people, they don't seem all that nice when they walk into them, but for them, it's home. They may not have much education. They may not own many possessions. They may be homeless. They may be addicts. They may be struggling with mental illness. I mean, every community has them. Our communities, every community you live in, it has them, right? You can probably think of some people that you know who really are just struggling. When you're around them, it's kind of weird. It's kind of awkward. Maybe they're socially awkward. Maybe you're around them and you're like, okay, I can't take a breath through my nose for a little while, right? You've been around people like that? It's like, because they still smell that good. They don't look that good. 2,000 years ago, same thing existed then, right? Has it ever changed? It's always been that way. There are people at the top and people at the bottom. The interesting thing is that 2,000 years ago, if you were at the bottom rung of the ladder, one of the only jobs available to you would be to be a shepherd. Did you know that? How many of you have nativity scenes in your homes, right? You got these nativity scenes in your home, so you got shepherds all around the baby. And so many times, growing up, I always thought it was like hey, a shepherd, that's pretty cool. That's not how it was 2,000 years ago. These people were the bottom rung of the ladder. If you had no other job you could find, you became a shepherd. As a matter of fact, did you know the religious leaders of the day literally taught their congregations this? This has been preserved in history. No help is to be given to heathens, people who don't believe in God, or shepherds. So if you're going to treat somebody like garbage, you treat shepherds like garbage. You don't even help them. They fall down, you walk past. They need help, you don't have to help them at all. Shepherds were the bottom rung of the ladder. The religious leaders of the day considered their job ceremonially unclean, which meant they couldn't even attend religious services. They were forbidden to enter the synagogues. Did you know that? How'd you like that? How'd you like a welcome sign up front that says, everyone welcome except shepherds? And if you tried to walk into a church or their version of church in that day, you'd be escorted out. How'd you like that? Make you feel real good about yourself, right? They were constantly on the move, which meant they didn't get to form long-term relationships because their flocks needed to be moved from one grassy area to the next, so they couldn't stay for long in any one place. They were so not trusted, their testimony was never even allowed in a court of law because they were considered unreliable. You are talking about the bottom rung of society. Now, why wasn't Jesus born in a palace? The key word is this: accessibility. If Jesus had been born here, who would have had access to him? Well, the rich, right? The powerful, the important people would have been able to see Jesus. But who could go and see him here? If you're born in an open barn. You know who can get to you when you're born in a barn? Even shepherds. As a matter of fact, turning the whole world upside down on the night of Jesus' birth, only one group is told about the birth of the creator of the universe. It says that night there were shepherds staying in fields nearby, guarding their flocks of sheep, and suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared among them. And the radiance of the Lord's glory surrounded them, and they were terrified. But the angel reassured them. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David. And you will recognize him by this sign. You will find a baby, wrapped snugly in strips of cloth, lying in a manger." Suddenly the angel was joined by a vast host of others, the armies of heaven, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and peace on earth to those with whom God is pleased." And when the angels had returned to heaven, the shepherds said to each other, "Let's go to Bethlehem. Let's see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about." And because of where he was born, the lowest of the lowest in that society had access to the creator of the universe. He was making a statement with where he was born. A statement that is so important for us if we follow Jesus today. And here's the statement. All people are valuable to this God. All people. You know, when you encounter those people in our communities, that you look at them and many times you know that you dress better than they do. And you may have more teeth than they do. And you may smell better than they do. But you are never more valuable to God than they are. Years and years and years ago, I came up with a statement, and I don't remember if I read it or I just figured it out. But it was a phrase that I've used since then called masterpieces with mud. And some of you heard me teach about this before. This is the most valuable painting that has ever been sold. It's a painting by Leonardo da Vinci, his masterpiece. It's sold for, look at that, almost $500 million. $500 million. Doesn't seem like it'd be worth that to me, but hey, to each his own, right? Somebody paid nearly $500 million for this. Now, you know there are people in the world who like to damage valuable pieces of art. Let's say that someone broke into this person's house one day and threw a bucket of mud all over this masterpiece. Is there anything the owner of that painting that you could conceive of that they wouldn't do to restore it? They'd do anything to restore this masterpiece. The reality is, what Jesus was demonstrating, what God was demonstrating to the whole world, the way he was born and who he told about his birth, was that every human being is a masterpiece of God's creation covered in mud. We're all masterpieces covered in mud. Every human being. But we are infinitely valuable to God, regardless of how we smell and how we look and where we live and what we own and what we do. There's never been a moment where you have encountered somebody who wasn't a masterpiece to God. Is that how you think about people? Do you see them as masterpieces? Masterpieces with mud? He's so clear. He says, listen, don't you dare be proud. You be willing to associate with people of even low position. Don't you be conceited. Did Jesus do that? Absolutely. He was born in that place so that the lowest rung of society at the time would have access to him. He opened the way for everyone to be with him because everyone's important to him. Yep, they may have a lot of mud all over them. But he is a restoring God who longs so deeply to move into their life and restore them. Is this how you view the people around you? Or have you become a little bit arrogant? So let me test this a little bit. Is this a masterpiece with mud, how you think about him? You see a masterpiece with mud, right? How about the other side? Is that what you think? There are all these sites about the people of Walmart. And yes, sometimes their outfits are funny, right? Here's another one. It's okay to chuckle. There's nothing wrong with the laughter that sometimes their outfits create. But do you then put the right thought in your mind that that is a masterpiece? If she'd have been alive when Jesus was born, God would have sent his angels to her to say, oh my goodness, I so want you to know about me. Is that how you see an addict, an alcoholic? Do you see the masterpiece with mud in this scene? How about with them? And what do you see? I've told you many times, you don't have any control over the first thought in your mind, but you are totally in control of the second thought. You can't help your reaction when you see someone or smell someone. You can't help the first thought in your mind, but the second thought is 100% yours to own. After you see, after you smell, is the next thought, oh my goodness, this person right here, I am looking at a masterpiece. Covered in mud, just like me. And if this person would have been alive 2,000 years ago, God the Father would have sent his angels to tell them, hey, why don't you go to Bethlehem because you're going to see something amazing. You're going to see the creator of the universe lying in a manger. The Savior of the world come for them. Many of you say that you follow Jesus. Whew. Have I given you enough to do this next week? Is that enough, right? Isn't it amazing? See why I wanted to do this message quick? I wasn't planning to teach today, but I read that. I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to teach about this. These values were there all along. The incredible humility of Jesus, and more importantly, the accessibility of Jesus, regardless of who you are and where you've been and what you've done, you matter to God still, and you always will. See why this is so important? We follow him, so people want to know what Jesus is like. They're supposed to be able to look at us. So can people look at you and see these two qualities? Do people look at you and say, oh my goodness, they're always so humble and gentle? Right? We all have some work to do on that one. And then, are there people for whom you really struggle to keep their high value in mind? Or do you let their politics or their behavior put you just a little bit above them? So your mud, well, that's not that bad, but their mud, boy, that's really bad. That stuff has to go. We treat people like God the Father did, regardless of what you've been through, what you've done, where you live, how you smell, how many teeth you got left, how high your education was. Regardless of all that, you are valuable to us because you, just as you are valuable to God. That's what we bring into this world. It's what Jesus brought. Let me have you all bow your heads as we finish today. Some of you are just exploring your faith here with us or while you're watching online, so thank you for being here with us. You heard one of the most important things I could ever say. You, just as you are so valuable to God. You may not feel valuable in this world. You may not feel very valuable to anyone. But God loves you just as you are. You matter to him. And the reason Jesus was born in the way he was so that and the way he lived. He didn't live in a palace. He lived among everyone so that any human being at any time that wanted access to him could have it. And he wants you to come to him today and get to know him personally. A real God, and you get to know him. That's what this is about. The Bible says that he came here eventually knowing that he would have to lay down his life for all of us, and that's what he did. He died on a cross to pay for everything we've done that's wrong. All the times we have dishonored other people, countless times where we've looked down on other people, we've said cruel things to other people, we have damaged other people, these masterpieces of God. That had to be paid for, and Jesus paid for all of it with his death, and then he rose again. And if you will let him, he will begin a relationship with you today. If you want this with your head bowed and your eyes closed, say something like this in your heart to him. Say, Jesus, I'm turning to you today. I need you. I know that you came for me, that you consider me valuable just as I am. So I'm turning to you. Please forgive me. Come make your home inside of me. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we finish up, would you all take your little card out of your program? Even if you're a regular attender, we ask you to do this every week. And just take a moment and fill this out. If you're a regular attender, just put your name down. We know the rest of it. But some of you just prayed and you asked Jesus to forgive you. Would you check that box right there, that little blank? Or maybe you've renewed your commitment today. Check that box. Let us know. If you have questions you want to ask or something you want us to pray about, we will pray for you. Just go ahead and fill this out. Then drop it in one of the 2 offering boxes back by the doors where you came in. Thanks so much for coming. Hope to see you again tomorrow. Merry Christmas.